Hello, welcome back to my studio. My name's Catherine, and today I'm going to do this extraordinary surfer chap. I was down at the beach the other day, and this is apparently a hydrofoil special surfboard, a bit like these new sailing, well they're not so new now, sailing boats that have hydrofoils. Anyway, I found it fascinating, and I'm going to, in a minute, show you a tiny bit of footage of him gliding across the water. I'm going to use Cotman watercolors today because a lot of people can't afford very expensive water or the professional grade. And if you're just beginning, sometimes it's not a bad thing to try out with a student brand, but Cotman are actually very good, I find, especially in this colour range, which is yellow ochre. This is a cobalt blue hue, but I find it's very good. A raw umber, a burnt umber, a Payne's grey, a light red. I did have a Daily Rowney, but this is a Rembrandt. The only expensive one I have here is a cobalt turquoise Daniel Smith, which I find a little bit grey on the grey side. Perhaps I would have been better with Viridian, but anyway, that came to hand. And that's just a cobalt blue and a light red mix, which I didn't actually use, but anyway. And this is my palette after painting. Now, I'm using the paint right out of the tube, and sometimes that's a good idea, especially with these Cotmans. Anyway, let's get on with it. So I hope you enjoyed that clip. I found it extraordinary to watch. He was just like hovering over the sea. So anyway, we're going to paint him now. So thinking about it, I showed you the colours that I had laid out, the yellow ochre, cobalt blue, raw umber, burnt umber, Payne's grey, light red, cobalt turquoise. But actually I never used any Payne's grey or light red, but I did use the others. So the sky was just a pretty much pure cobalt blue, just loosely washed in. And then the greys, the blue greys that made the sea, were with a little bit of yellow ochre or raw umber mixed in, and a little bit of cobalt turquoise, which, as I say, is fairly grey in itself. This is all very loose washes. It was all done in one. I don't even think I used the hairdryer at all to dry anything off. It was all drying pretty well. You can see that I used resist wax crayon, so that preserved the white of the paper for the waves. And you just have to be bold and wipe your brush across it. And it's all about feeling the softness of the ocean, looking at where the wave rises and the colour that you want to denote that with, the gentleness of the foreground, the water just washing in over the beach. And I use this reservoir brush in the hills in the background. You can see it sort of puts a blob down with the reservoir part, and then it has the long point, and it makes a texture. And because it's quite wet, that sort of bleeds out and settles and gives me instant sort of bushes and trees, and it's in the distance. We don't have to put in every leaf or anything. So I find that quite a useful brush. You want to be a little bit careful along the edge of the water. We always want the horizon straight. And then I'm semi-charging the pigment into the wet paint. So I'm using a burnt umber, raw umber mix there, and it's settling down into the bluey grey that I had put down first. And then just using the tip of the brush to put a little bit of calligraphy in, something for your eye to look at. Constantly changing the mixture, a little bit warmer, a little bit more burnt umber, a little bit more yellow ochre or raw umber, so that it's not all a homogeneous one. Putting the little island in. It's all just adding context to where he was, what the day was like. And here I've got a bit of a bloom, so I've wiped the moisture out of the brush, gone back in and picked that bloom up. Very easy, it's gone. And then I'm using, I know my hand is in the way, but I'm using a slightly darker wash just to put in, there were some sort of cliffs in the background, and I thought that would be quite nice to have that value change happening, sort of to balance him, because he's going to be fairly dark. So across the other side I want to sort of balance him with the light and dark in the hills. Otherwise, if it was all just one colour, if you imagine a seesaw, teeter-totter, he would be dark and he'd be pulling that side of the picture down. So that light and dark on the left there, where my brush is now, balances out, will balance out what he will be when I paint him in. I hope that made sense. So just putting in some details. And here I am. I've got a dark wash. Painting him in very basic. Just his legs, and that's the foil. And at the end I will come back in with a white pen, gel pen or paint pen, and pick out a few highlights on him. But that is all he was. He's just a silhouette. He's wearing a black wetsuit, he's on a dark board, and he's in the ocean, flying over the waves. How cool is that? Quite made me want to take up foil surfing. I was a sailor in a former life, so I still do sail, but anything to do with the sea and I'm there. Mostly kayaking nowadays. So putting in a bit of detail on the waves and put in a bit of, he's riding a wave, so you want the darkness to suggest the surf, the rise of the surf that he's coming along on. And then I wanted to pull this breaking wave further forward. So I used a bit of the cobalt turquoise mixed in with the grey to pull that forward a bit and sit him further back. And I'm stroking in, sort of feeling the stroke of the stroke and the way the water just was washing. A little bit of definition. The light's sort of up to the left and behind me actually. So there's always a little bit of shadow in the wave at the nearest point to me. touching in a few darks. Basically 3 or 4 colours I've used. And then the foreground, which is the water washing in over the beach. So the little cross sort of brush marks are just showing where there's the light, a little bit of sort of foamy stuff, and then the sweep as the water just skims along the top of the beach. It's all light and shadow with water, reflected light. And that's just the little line of wave trickling in. And then again I felt I wanted a little bit more value to balance him out as well again, because he's dark and quite heavy. I think balance is something you sort of feel the more you do, you become more in tune with what feels balanced and cohesive, and what you feel you can put in and what you feel you can leave out. It's a little bit more colour, a little bit more cobalt turquoise with the cobalt blue mixture. And the wash underneath is now lovely and dry, so there's not going to be any bleeding or movement. So what I put down pretty much stays where it is. It's just another wave coming in for him to surf on. And just softening some edges. And a little bit of raw umber and yellow ochre mix for the sand. Just a little arc of sand. And the final touch. It's a little paint pen, just a few highlights, top of his head, his arm, and slightly on his leg and on the surfboard. And we're done. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you for joining in the journey, and look forward to seeing you next time. Happy painting.